Chapter 1. The universe had always been a vast, unknowable expanse. But for Captain Aiden took Carter, a breath. It had felt as if things were finally coming together. Won. Humanity, for now, just a speck on the cosmic that scale, victory was had begun to carve its place in the stars. The fight for survival was each new colony established, but for the first time in a long while, technology, she felt hope felt a sense of quiet pride. The Earth Spirit, the United had Earth been Federation, UEF, and together was rising. They were unstoppable, not just as a human endeavor, but as a symbol of what might be possible when a species, fragile and young, dared to reach for the stars. Inside the command center aboard the UEF flagship Liberty, Aiden leaned over the holotable, his eyes scanning the latest intel. The galaxy was shifting. His own fleet had just completed an intensive training exercise, preparing for the first real conflict with another species. But peace, it seemed, had never truly lasted long. The Deathworlders, a species so brutal and powerful that their mere name caused shivers through the galaxy, had always been out there. But the UEF had been safe, at least, they thought they were. Until now. The alarm jolted him from his thoughts. The monitor in front of him flickered to life, showing a secure transmission from UEF Command. General Drake's voice crackled through the speakers, tight with urgency. "Aiden, we need you in the war room. Now." Aiden's heart tightened. He stood, his boots clicking sharply against the cold steel floor. "Understood, General," he muttered to himself, turning towards the door. The steps from the bridge to the war room felt longer than usual. Inside the war room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. His senior officers, faces grim, clustered around the large central table, watching a series of rapidly updating reports. The door closed behind him with a hiss, and all eyes turned to Aiden. He nodded silently, taking his place at the head of the table. "Captain," General Drake began, "we've just received word of a full-scale attack on Epsilon 9. Aiden's breath caught in his chest. Epsilon 9 was a small but crucial human colony on the edge of Deathworlder territory. It had taken years to establish, a symbol of humanity's ability to thrive even in the most hostile of environments. A peaceful world, or so it had seemed. Now, it was nothing more than a memory. "What happened?" Aiden asked, his voice low, controlled. He forced himself to remain calm. Panic wouldn't help anyone now. An entire Deathworlder fleet appeared without warning, "Captain. They've completely wiped out the colony's defenses. The survivors are minimal." Drake paused, as though struggling to find the right words. The Deathworlders left a message. Aiden's stomach twisted. He didn't need to hear it. He already knew what it would say. The arrogance of the Deathworlders had always been their downfall. They thought themselves gods, untouchable, above any other species. Drake gestured toward a holoscreen that flickered to life. A distorted, mocking voice filled the room. "Your galaxy is ours. Bow to your kings or perish." Aiden clenched his fists at his sides. He could feel the heat rising in his chest. His sister had been stationed on Epsilon 9. He had spoken to her just last week. "How many dead?" Aiden asked, his voice low but sharp. "Over 20,000 civilians, including your sister, Captain," the officer beside Drake answered, his voice tight with sympathy. "We've confirmed she was in the Central Command building when the attack started." Aiden felt the blood drain from his face, a bitter taste rising in his mouth. He had known the risks, had accepted them. But this was personal. His younger sister, the only family he had left after the death of their parents, was gone. The Deathworlders had crossed a line that no one, not even they, could undo. He turned sharply to face Drake, his eyes hard. "We need to retaliate, General. Now." Drake gave a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples. "We're still too weak to take on the full might of their fleet, Aiden. They're the most dangerous species in the galaxy. We can't risk it." "They've already risked it, General," Aiden shot back. "This isn't just an attack. It's a declaration of war. We can't just sit here and let them take whatever they want." The room fell silent, each officer exchanging looks. Aiden's reputation as a tactician was well known, but this wasn't a regular mission. This was an all-out war against an enemy that had never been defeated. "Captain, you're asking us to risk everything," Drake said quietly. "Do you really think humanity can stand up to them?" Aiden's eyes locked onto Drake's, steady and unflinching. "We're going to do more than stand up to them. We're going to make them regret thinking they're untouchable." His voice, calm but filled with an undeniable certainty, cut through the tension in the room. The officers around the table didn't need convincing. They knew what had to be done. Humanity had spent too long on the sidelines, trying to avoid conflict. But the time for caution was over. If humanity was to survive, it would have to fight, and win. "Prepare the fleet," Aiden commanded. "I'm not waiting for their next move. We'll strike first." General Drake gave a slow nod, his expression tight with worry but also a grudging respect for Aiden's decisiveness. "We'll have our fleet ready within the hour, Captain." Aiden turned, already heading for the door. The cold metal felt even colder beneath his feet now. He wasn't just leading a mission. He was leading humanity's fight for survival. As he passed the doorway, he couldn't help but glance back at the holoscreen displaying the image of Epsilon 9. The silent, empty landscape. The ruins of everything they had built. And the message from Jorkoth still echoed in his mind. "Bow to your kings or perish." Aiden clenched his jaw, fighting back the rising tide of emotion threatening to overtake him. This wasn't just about strategy or tactics anymore. It was personal. "We'll make them bow," Aiden muttered under his breath, as he strode down the corridor toward the command deck. "And I'll make them pay." This chapter establishes the moment where Aiden's world changes, as a sudden attack forces him into action. His personal loss provides the emotional backbone for his leadership, while the tension in the war room highlights the stakes involved. The reader is left with a sense of urgency and determination, setting the stage for the upcoming conflict with the Deathworlders. Chapter 2. Aiden stood on the observation deck of the Liberty, gazing out into the void. Space had always been quiet, calm, almost serene. But now, the stars beyond seemed to pulse with a kind of foreboding energy. The Epsilon 9 colony was gone, and humanity had only one choice left: fight or be obliterated. The hum of the ship's engines was a constant, grounding reminder of the ship's mission. The Liberty was the pride of the UEF fleet, a ship capable of holding its own in almost any engagement. But the Deathworlders had never fought anyone who wasn't already on their knees. "We've reached the engagement zone, Captain," Lieutenant Walker's voice crackled through the comms. Aiden gave a quick nod, his hands tightening around the railing. He had made the decision. No turning back now. "Status on the fleet." "All ships are in position, Captain. The 2nd and 3rd battalions are ready for tactical assault. We're ready to strike." Aiden turned, meeting Walker's steady gaze. There was no fear in the young officer's eyes, only determination. They all knew what was at stake, and they were ready to make their stand. "Good. Prepare for combat maneuvers," Aiden said, his voice sharp. "This won't be easy." The Liberty entered the outer rim of Deathworlder territory, an area once thought to be too dangerous for human exploration. But that was before the Deathworlders had shown their hand. Now, it was time for humanity to make its own mark. Aiden's mind raced as the ship's weapon systems came online. The brief tactical reports had outlined the Deathworlder fleet's strengths and weaknesses, but they had never encountered humans in a serious fight. This would be their first test. The Deathworlders had superiority in numbers and firepower, but Aiden wasn't planning to meet them head-on. His mind worked fast, piecing together the pieces of a puzzle. A direct assault would be suicidal. No, he needed to disrupt their formation, make them second-guess themselves. A sudden strike, unexpected, would give humanity the edge. "Lock weapons onto their flagship," Aiden ordered. "We'll draw their attention and then—" Before he could finish, the warning klaxon blared across the ship. "Incoming missiles!" the tactical officer shouted, his voice tight with panic. Aiden's instincts kicked in, and in an instant, the Liberty veered hard to starboard, its engines roaring to life. The ship shuddered violently as the first volley of Deathworlder missiles slammed into its shields. The glowing blue barrier held for a moment, then crackled with sparks of energy. "Shields at 60%, the officer called, his voice strained. Aiden's hand slammed against the control panel, guiding the Liberty in a rapid evasive maneuver. The ship lurched again as another barrage of missiles impacted, this time shaking the entire hull. A surge of adrenaline coursed through Aiden's veins, but he stayed focused. "Return fire. Full power to the forward plasma cannons," Aiden commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. The Liberty's forward weapons roared to life, spewing bursts of bright blue energy. The Deathworlder fleet, initially taken aback by the sudden aggression, adjusted quickly, retaliating with a full-force counterattack. But they hadn't anticipated the humans' unpredictability. "Captain, the enemy flagship is locking onto us." Lieutenant Walker's voice came through, tight with concern. "I know," Aiden muttered, eyes narrowing. "That's exactly what we want. Prepare to deploy decoys. Now." The Liberty fired off several small drones, designed to mimic the ship's signature. It was a desperate move, but it bought them the precious seconds they needed. The Deathworlder's flagship fired, its energy beam cutting through space like a comet. But the decoys worked. The beam missed by a wide margin, and the Liberty took advantage of the brief opening. Aiden slammed his hand down on the weapons console again. "Concentrate fire on their starboard side. We take out their shields, we have a chance." The Liberty's weapons screamed, sending concentrated bursts of energy into the heart of the Deathworlder flagship. The enemy vessel's shields flared brightly under the assault, but they held, as expected. "Sir, they're reorienting. They're about to launch a full broadside," Walker warned. "Not if we get to them first," Aiden said, gritting his teeth. "Prepare boarding teams. We're going in." The Liberty closed the distance quickly, its engines pushing the ship into the heart of the enemy's formation. The Deathworlder's response was immediate, a desperate counterattack that caught the rest of the UEF fleet off guard. The Liberty's shields flared again as another round of fire rocked the ship. "Damn it," Aiden muttered. "Focus fire on their forward weapons array." The Liberty fired once more, this time aiming for the weapons base, hitting the mark and knocking out the Deathworlder ship's primary offensive weapons. It was a crucial hit, and the Deathworlders were now scrambling to regain control. "Now, boarding teams, move out," Aiden ordered. On the ship's lower decks, UEF Marines suited up, grabbing their weapons with determination. Aiden didn't hesitate. He led the charge himself, heading straight for the airlock. It was a dangerous maneuver, but Aiden knew the only way to win was to fight on their terms. The Liberty had made its mark, and now the Deathworlders would feel the sting of human tenacity. The airlock hissed open, and the clang of boots on metal rang out in the enemy vessel's hulls. Aiden and his team stormed down the narrow corridors, clearing each room with precision. The Deathworlders fought back with brutal force, but they were caught off guard by the human resolve. Aiden led the charge, his pulse pounding in his ears. Each step he took felt heavier, each breath more labored as he fought his way through the ship's depths. Finally, they reached the bridge, and Aiden's heart surged with adrenaline. This was it, the point of no return. He slammed his boot into the door, forcing it open, and his team surged forward, guns raised. The Deathworlder commander stood at the center of the room, his alien eyes wide with shock. He didn't expect humans to come for him, not like this. "End it," Aiden said, his voice cold and steady. The commander's eyes narrowed, a flicker of respect, or was it fear, crossing his face. The last thing he saw before his world went dark was the glint of Aiden's blade. Back on the Liberty, the battle raged on. The Deathworlders were reeling, trying to regroup. Aiden's team had struck a significant blow, but the war was far from over. As he returned to the command deck, Walker met him with a grave expression. "They're pulling back." "But it's not over," Walker said, his voice tense. Aiden nodded. The first clash had been won, but it was only the beginning. The Deathworlders had underestimated humanity, and they were about to learn a painful lesson. Humans didn't back down. "Prepare for the next phase," Aiden said, his eyes hard with resolve. "We've just begun." This chapter sets the tone for the conflict, showing humanity's resolve and ingenuity as they take on the superior Deathworlders. The fast-paced, tactical battle highlights Aiden's leadership and the unpredictable nature of human strategy. With their first victory, Aiden knows this is only the beginning, and the stakes will only get higher from here. Chapter 3. The star-filled void was vast and silent, yet the Liberty and its fleet cut through it like a jagged knife, its engines humming with a steady rhythm of preparation. Aiden sat in the command center, his hands steepled in front of him, eyes focused on the tactical hologram that floated before him. The battle was far from over, but they had struck the Deathworlders a blow, and the taste of victory was bitter. "They're retreating," Lieutenant Walker reported, her voice tinged with disbelief. "They're pulling back to their homeworld, Captain." We've hit them harder than they expected. Aiden's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the readouts. The Deathworlders had underestimated humanity's ability to strike decisively. Their flagship had been heavily damaged, and several key vessels were either destroyed or incapacitated. But Aiden knew that the Deathworlders wouldn't stay down for long. They were too powerful, too prideful, to let a single defeat destroy them. "It's not over," Aiden murmured, his voice laced with caution. "Prepare for the counterattack." The days following their victory were filled with rapid adjustments, recalculating strategies, and assessing damage. The Liberty was still in one piece, but the same couldn't be said for all the ships in the UEF fleet. The Deathworlders had proven their resilience, regrouping quicker than expected. "We've got reports of their reinforcements arriving in Sector 4, Lieutenant Harris, the communications officer, said, his voice tense. "They're preparing to launch a full-scale counteroffensive." Aiden's jaw clenched. Time to show them why they shouldn't underestimate us. He strode toward the holotable, the flickering blue light casting sharp shadows across his face. His fingers moved quickly over the controls, arranging pieces of the new plan in his mind. This wouldn't be a direct engagement. The Deathworlders had overwhelming numbers. Instead, Aiden would do what humans did best: adapt. "Send in the interceptors," he commanded. "We're going to hit them where they least expect it." Hours later, the UEF fleet moved into position, the smaller interceptor ships darting ahead of the main force like a swarm of locusts. Their mission was clear: disrupt the Deathworlder lines, draw them out, and cause enough chaos to force them into disarray. The first strike was swift, an ambush in the outer rim. Aiden's heart raced as the interceptors launched their surprise attack on the Deathworlder reinforcements. The explosion of energy and debris rippled through the quiet of space, a flash of light that briefly illuminated the cold, infinite dark. "This is exactly what we needed," Walker said, her eyes scanning the battlefield on her console. "The Deathworlders are scrambling." "Good," Aiden replied, his tone cold. "Now, we hit them hard." The following hours were a blur of tactical maneuvers, rapid decisions, and the constant hum of comms and weapon systems. The Deathworlders fought back fiercely, but something was shifting. Their usual confidence was starting to crack. Aiden saw it on the tactical screens. Their lines were breaking, the usual cohesion now fractured into small pockets of resistance. "Captain, we've intercepted a communication," Lieutenant Harris announced, his voice more subdued than usual. "It's from their command fleet. They're calling for reinforcements from their homeworld." "Let them," Aiden said with a thin smile. "We've got them right where we want them." The final phase of the attack was the most dangerous. Aiden had gambled on the Deathworlders' arrogance, and it was paying off. Their reinforcements were slow to arrive, giving the UEF an unexpected window of opportunity. Aiden ordered the fleet to move in on their primary command ship, the Draxer's Wrath, a massive vessel that served as the heart of the Deathworlder military operations. "All ships, converge on Draxer's Wrath," Aiden ordered, his voice unwavering. "We cripple them now, or we lose the chance forever." The Liberty led the charge, its weapon systems fully charged, its hull straining as it moved toward the Deathworlder flagship. The rest of the fleet followed, their ships firing in unison, creating a barrage of firepower unlike anything the Deathworlders had seen before. "Brace for impact!" Walker shouted as the Liberty rocked under the weight of the incoming fire. The ship shuddered violently as the Deathworlders retaliated with everything they had. But this time, the humans were ready. The Liberty darted and weaved, dodging plasma shots and energy beams, while the other UEF ships launched targeted assaults, gradually wearing down the Deathworlder defenses. Aiden gritted his teeth, hands steady on the command console. "We're not backing off. Push them harder." As the battle raged, Aiden couldn't help but notice something changing in the Deathworlders' tactics. Their once immovable lines were starting to bend. The Liberty fired another shot at the Draxer's Wrath, and this time, the hit struck true, creating a massive explosion that rattled the flagship. "They're losing their cohesion," Walker said, her voice full of awe. "It's working, Captain." Aiden's eyes never left the tactical map, watching as the Deathworlder ships began to fall back. Their forces, once so formidable, were now retreating. "We've got them," Aiden said, almost to himself, but the words carried a weight that none of them could ignore. Minutes later, the Liberty stood in the midst of the wreckage of the Deathworlder fleet. The Draxar's Wrath had been severely damaged, and its weapons were now silent. The remaining Deathworlder ships were either retreating or destroyed. The victory was theirs, though Aiden knew better than to celebrate just yet. "All units, hold position," Aiden ordered. "We're not finished until we know they can't come back." He watched as the surviving Deathworlder vessels began to disengage, their shields flickering as they made a hasty retreat. It was a victory, but it came at a cost. Several UEF ships had been lost, and the Liberty had sustained damage that would take time to repair. But the mission had been successful, and the Deathworlders had been dealt a blow they wouldn't soon forget. Aiden looked around the bridge, his officers tired but relieved. There was no celebration, only quiet recognition of what had just occurred. The tide had turned. "Captain," Walker said, her voice steady but filled with a certain awe, "we did it. We've stopped them." Aiden took a breath, allowing himself a rare moment of calm. "We've made our mark, but the war's not over. We've only just begun." As the UEF fleet regrouped and the battle came to an end, Aiden stood at the observation window, staring into the blackness of space. The victory was significant, but the reality of what was to come pressed heavily on him. They had beaten the Deathworlders once, but they were far from defeated. The war was only beginning, and Aiden knew that this was just the first of many clashes. The galaxy was watching, and humanity's place in it was no longer uncertain. They had struck the first blow. Now, it was time to follow through. Chapter 4. The Final Confrontation. The quiet hum of the Liberty's engines was the only sound that filled the command deck as the ship drifted through the void. The chaos of the previous battles had settled into a tense lull, but Aiden knew it was far from over. He stood by the tactical holotable, his eyes tracing the movements of the remaining Deathworlder fleet. The Draxar's Wrath, the last bastion of their military, was still intact, though heavily damaged. Its pride had been wounded, but it would not fall easily. "We've pushed them back, but they're regrouping," Lieutenant Walker reported, her tone serious. "They're consolidating their forces, Captain. We can't afford to wait much longer." Aiden turned, looking out the viewport at the scattered remnants of the Deathworlder fleet. "We don't wait. We hit them now, before they have a chance to recover." His eyes were steely, hardened with determination. It had been weeks since the attack on Epsilon 9, and the personal loss he had suffered still burned within him. He had made a vow to himself, and to his fallen comrades, that the Deathworlders would pay for what they had done. But now, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about ensuring humanity's survival. "Sir," Lieutenant Harris interrupted, his voice tight with urgency. "The Draxar's Wrath is holding its position near their homeworld, likely awaiting reinforcements. If we go in now, we risk getting caught in their full force." Aiden's mind raced. The Deathworlders' arrogance had been their downfall once, but now it was time to finish the job. "I'm not waiting for them to come to us. We'll go to them, swift, brutal, and unexpected. We have one chance at this." Walker's eyes narrowed. "Sir, are you suggesting we go straight for their flagship? Even with the fleet scattered, that's a suicide run." Aiden met her gaze. "We've survived this far because we've fought differently. We've adapted when they expected us to falter. We can take them down now, before they even know what hit them." The plan was set, and there was no turning back. Aiden stood at the head of the briefing table, his officers gathered around, each one quietly absorbing the gravity of the mission. The fleet was prepared, but the risks were undeniable. Every decision now carried the weight of thousands of lives, both human and Deathworlder. "Listen up," Aiden said, his voice sharp and commanding. "We go in fast. We don't give them time to react. We'll use the asteroid field near their homeworld as cover, launching a surprise assault directly on the Draxar's Wrath." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We strike hard, we strike first, and we finish this." The room was silent. A few officers exchanged glances, but none of them questioned Aiden's command. They trusted him. No, they believed in him. His reputation for turning impossible odds into victories had earned him their loyalty. "We move in 2 hours. Prepare your teams," Aiden continued. "We're going to bring the fight to them. Now, let's get to work." The fleet assembled at the edge of the asteroid field, the Liberty leading the charge. Aiden stood at the center of the command deck, his eyes fixed on the holotable as it displayed the Deathworlder flagship's position. The ship was massive, a dark behemoth in the distance. It would take everything they had to pierce its defenses. "Captain, we're in position," Walker said, her voice calm but filled with anticipation. Aiden's fingers hovered over the controls, his mind sharp and calculating. This was it, the moment everything hinged on. One wrong move, and they would be obliterated. But there was no time for hesitation. "Launch all interceptors," Aiden ordered. "Follow my lead. Focus on the weak points we identified in their defenses. We need to keep their attention on us while the main force breaks through." The fleet surged forward, the Liberty leading the way. The first volley of fire came from the Draxer's Wrath, massive energy beams lighting up the dark expanse of space. The UEF ships responded with their own barrage, the explosions lighting up the void in a chaotic display of power. "Shields holding," Walker reported. "But they're closing in on us. We've got to move faster." Aiden's mind raced, the tension mounting. This was their only shot, and if they failed, the entire fleet would be wiped out. "Push forward. Don't stop." The Liberty surged ahead, the crew fighting with everything they had. The asteroid field was a labyrinth of rocks and debris, but it provided the cover they needed to close the distance without being overwhelmed. Aiden could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. Every move, every decision, could mean life or death for those he commanded. "Target their starboard side," Aiden commanded. "Focus all fire on their engines. If we can cripple them, we'll have a chance." The battle raged on, the Liberty moving with precision as its weapons tore into the Draxer's Wrath. The Deathworlders fought back viciously, their weapons capable of shredding entire ships with ease. But the humans weren't backing down. "Shields are weakening," Walker said, her voice strained. "Captain, we can't take much more of this." Aiden's mind worked quickly. They had to create a distraction, something to pull the Deathworlders off balance. "Deploy decoy drones now." The decoys shot out, mimicking the Liberty's energy signature and drawing the Deathworlder fire. The tactic worked, just long enough for the main force to get in close. The Liberty moved in, firing directly at the flagship's weapons array. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the Draxer's Wrath erupted in a violent explosion. The shockwave rippled through the fleet, and Aiden could feel it deep in his chest. "Direct hit," Walker said, her voice breathless. "They're losing power. Their shields are failing." Aiden's grip on the console tightened. This was the moment. He didn't wait. "All ships, focus on the flagship. Do not stop until it's destroyed." The final moments were chaos. The Liberty moved in for the kill, its weapons charging one last time. The Deathworlders fought back, but their once pristine coordination was now a fractured mess. The Draxer's Wrath was crippled, its engines sputtering, and the remaining ships in their fleet were in disarray. "Fire!" Aiden shouted, and the Liberty's cannons unleashed a final barrage. The blast struck true, hitting the heart of the Deathworlder flagship. The explosion that followed was cataclysmic, ripping the massive vessel apart in a brilliant display of fire and destruction. For a moment, there was only silence. The battle was over. Aiden stood motionless on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the destruction unfolding on the tactical screen. The Deathworlder fleet was scattered, their once feared flagship now reduced to debris. It was over. The final confrontation had ended in a victory for humanity. "We did it," Walker said softly, a note of disbelief in her voice. Aiden didn't respond at first. The weight of the battle still hung heavily on him, the lives lost, the destruction, and the cost of it all. But deep down, he knew this was a turning point. "We did," he said, his voice steady. "But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning." As the Liberty and the remaining fleet surveyed the wreckage of the Deathworlder fleet, Aiden knew one thing for certain: humanity had proven itself. And there was no going back. Chapter 5. The silence was deafening in the aftermath of the battle. The Liberty stood alone amidst the wreckage of the Deathworlder fleet, its hull scorched but intact, its crew battered but alive. Aiden stood on the bridge, staring out into the void, his mind racing. They had done it. The Deathworlders were defeated, their once mighty fleet scattered to the winds. But for all the victory, there was no joy in Aiden's heart. Not yet. It wasn't the time for celebration. Not yet. He turned, glancing at the faces around him. Lieutenant Walker, her face still streaked with soot, stood at the tactical console, her expression unreadable. Lieutenant Harris, usually the most upbeat officer, was silent, his gaze distant. They had all seen too much, lost too much. But they had won. And that was what mattered. "Report, Lieutenant," Aiden said, his voice firm, cutting through the quiet tension in the room. Walker's eyes met his. "We've taken out the majority of the Deathworlder fleet, Captain. Their flagship is gone, and their forces are in disarray. We've got minimal casualties among the UEF fleet, but we've lost several ships. The Deathworlders, they're retreating back to their homeworld." Aiden's mind immediately went to the Draxer system, where the Deathworlders had come from, their home, their stronghold. It wasn't over. Not yet. "Any signs of reinforcements?" Aiden asked, though he already knew the answer. "No, sir," Walker replied, shaking her head. "Their communication channels are silent. But there's no telling if they're regrouping or calling for help from the outer colonies." "We need to ensure they don't recover," Aiden said, his voice low. "We hit them hard, but we finish this. We can't let them rebuild." "Captain," Lieutenant Harris spoke up, his voice tense. "The loss of their fleet, that was their backbone. It's hard to imagine they can bounce back from this. But we've got to be cautious. If they pull in reinforcements—" "I know," Aiden interrupted, his mind already calculating the next steps. "We're not letting our guard down. Not yet." Hours passed, and the UEF fleet slowly began to regroup, the damaged ships limping back into formation. Aiden stood in the war room, the weight of the decision ahead pressing down on him. The Liberty had won the battle, but the war? The war was far from over. The UEF had suffered losses, and the cost of those losses weighed heavily on Aiden's shoulders. He had led them into battle, but the responsibility for those lives, those sacrifices, lay with him. The faces of the men and women who had fallen in the fight flashed in his mind. A price had been paid, and Aiden wasn't sure how much more he could ask of his people. "Sir," a voice broke through his thoughts. It was Walker again, her face hard with determination. "We've just received word from UEF Command. They're requesting our status." Aiden nodded, the gravity of his position settling back over him. "Patch them through." The holoscreen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of General Drake. His eyes scanned the battlefield map before locking onto Aiden's. "Captain Carter," Drake said, his voice deep, "status report." Aiden straightened, meeting Drake's gaze. "We've won the battle, sir. The Deathworlder fleet has been destroyed, and their flagship is no more. We've suffered casualties, but we've secured the victory. However, their retreat isn't a surrender. We can't afford to relax." Drake's face hardened. "Understood. You've done well, Captain. But the war isn't over. We need to prepare for the long haul. The Deathworlders are a wounded animal right now, but they're not finished. They'll lick their wounds and come back. The next phase will be the real test." Aiden's mind raced. The Deathworlders, though broken, would never forget the humiliation. They would rebuild. But would humanity be ready? "We'll move forward with caution," Aiden said, his voice steady. "We can't allow them to regroup." Drake nodded slowly. "That's the plan. For now, take your fleet to Draxer. We need to show them that humanity is here to stay. We'll give them no room to recover." "Yes, sir," Aiden replied. "We'll move out immediately." The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. The fleet, though battered, was ready to move out. Aiden stood on the bridge of the Liberty, his eyes scanning the fleet's progress on the tactical map. The Draxer system loomed ahead, dark and silent. The Deathworlders' homeworld, a place of ancient power, was now under siege. The plan was simple. Move in, establish a blockade, and prevent any Deathworlder reinforcements from reaching the homeworld. It was a show of strength. A message. And it had to be sent with precision. Aiden stood at the head of the table in the war room, his officers around him. "We're going in strong, but we're not starting a ground war," he said, his voice commanding. "We take control of the system, cut off any escape routes, and we make sure they know they're not the only ones who can bring the fight." The officers nodded, their faces resolute. Make sure the fleet stays tight, Aiden continued. We hold the line. The Deathworlders may be on their heels, but they're not finished. I don't expect an easy fight. We'll be ready, sir, Walker said, her voice unwavering. The Liberty and the rest of the fleet moved into the Draxer system under the cover of darkness, their presence undetected by the Deathworlders until it was too late. Aiden's mind was clear now, focused on the task at hand. The plan had been executed with military precision, the fleet surrounding the system, cutting off all possible escape routes. Blockade in place, Walker reported, her voice calm. We've got them trapped, Captain. Aiden nodded. Now we wait. The stillness of space seemed to stretch endlessly before them. The Deathworlders had nowhere to run. Their pride, their arrogance, it had all led to this moment. Hours passed. The tension was palpable, the waiting game now more difficult than the battle itself. The UEF fleet stood firm, a reminder that humanity would not be pushed aside. Finally, a transmission came through. A message from the Deathworlders. Aiden stared at the screen as the transmission flickered to life, revealing the face of Jorkoth. His expression was unreadable, though there was a hint of something in his eyes, something Aiden hadn't seen before. You have proven your strength, human, Jorkoth said, his voice low. But do not think this is over. The Deathworlders will rise again. You may have won this round, but we will rebuild. You have not seen the last of us. Aiden met Jorkoth's gaze, his voice steady. You've lost, Jorkoth. Your fleet is gone. Your people are broken. And you will never rule this galaxy again. Jorkoth's eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. The transmission cut out. Aiden exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment sinking in. The Deathworlders were defeated, but their will remained. This wasn't the end. But it was a beginning, one that humanity had earned. We've won, Aiden said quietly, to no one in particular. And we're not going anywhere. As the UEF fleet held its position, the stars outside seemed just a little brighter. Humanity had faced the impossible, and had emerged victorious. The war was far from over, but Aiden knew one thing for certain. Humanity was no longer a footnote in the galaxy. They had proven their place. The future, uncertain as it was, now belonged to them.